The London Stock Exchange, one of the world's oldest stock markets. Sotheby's and Christie's auction houses, the Western world's two largest auction houses. Lloyd's of London, one of the world's oldest insurance markets. The Royal Society of London, the first society in the world dedicated to the advancement of the scientific process. What do all of these iconic institutions have in common? They were all founded in English coffeehouses during the 17th and 18th centuries. The English coffeehouses of the 17th and 18th centuries were areas of social compromise that, while not solving England's problem with social conflict, did set the stage for England to become globally dominant in science, technology, and commerce, a legacy that continues until today.
The Black Death of 1348 had an even greater death toll in England than it did on the whole European continent, wiping out almost half of England's population. The rigid class system that had lasted in England for over 200 years, feudal society, was turned on its head as the surviving landless laborers found competition for their services and tracts of land left ownerless after the Black Death. They became business proprietors and began earning money, creating new artisan and merchant classes in England. This upending of the feudal system was an unwelcome change to the most privileged class in England. The rising artisan and merchant classes began to challenge the nobility's financial dominance. The nobles became scared that this could lead to a challenge of their political dominance. King Edward III took measures to prevent the political advancement of the rising classes in England by attempting to free society in a state-imposed, rigid class system. The tool he used to make this happen: sumptuary laws. Sumptuary laws are laws that restrict luxury items, such as certain foods, furniture, jewelry, and clothing, to certain classes of people in order to control behavior and ensure that a specific class structure is maintained. A sumptuary law of 1336 stated that, quote, "No knight under the estates of a lord, esquire, or gentleman, nor any other person, shall wear any shoes or boots that have spikes or points which exceed the length of 2 inches, under the forfeiture of 40 pence, unquote. These laws extended a degree of feudal class rigidity for centuries after feudalism began deteriorating as the principal economic model in England. They created conflict between wealthy members of the lower class who wanted to enjoy the luxuries of the era and noblemen who wanted to maintain their political power. Thankfully, in the 1600s, establishments materialized throughout the country, particularly in Oxford and London, where these social rules did not apply. Coffeehouses.
All through the medieval period in England, particularly in growing cities such as Oxford and London, clean drinking water became more and more scarce as water supplies, such as rivers, became polluted by human waste and sewage. Fermented beverages such as beer and wine were popular alternatives to water due to their ability to be safely stored without risk of microbial contamination. These alcoholic beverages, while safe to drink, deaden the senses and depress the thinking process. The first coffee in England, introduced from the Turkish Empire, tasted by all accounts disgusting, but it was safe to drink, and the high amounts of caffeine it contained had a remarkably stimulating effect on the brain. It promoted both thinking and the exchange of those thoughts with others. While this bitter but stimulating beverage was being introduced to English society, a community that would become known as the virtuoso community began to develop within the noble class. The term virtuoso arose in Renaissance Italy and referred to those who are interested in promoting intellectual curiosity, particularly in all things novel, like coffee. The concept of the virtuosi, or intellectual class, migrated to England in the 1600s and was first published in Henry Peacham's Gentleman's Guide, The Complete Gentleman, in 1634. Scholars have even identified the founding fathers of this virtuosi class within the noble class: Thomas Howard, the 14th Earl of Arundel, and Francis Bacon. This was the group that populated coffeehouses, exchanged ideas, and eventually began inviting interested members of the lower classes in to join in their conversation.
The first coffeehouse to open in the British Isles, the Angel, was opened in 1650 in Oxford by a Jewish merchant named Jacob. It soon became a popular gathering place for university scholars. The first coffeehouse in London was opened in 1652 in St. Michael's Alley in Cornhill. It was owned by Pascal Rosé. He was the servant of a merchant who traded in Turkish goods. Early coffeehouses were frequented almost exclusively by scholars and virtuosi of the noble classes, and as a result, were more like private clubs than public houses. But it wasn't long before members of all classes discovered that for a penny, the cost of a cup of coffee, they could join what would become the biggest explosion of ideas in human history. As a result, some early coffeehouses became like miniature colleges, or as they became nicknamed, penny universities. This was thanks to a coffeehouse culture that was free from sumptuary laws. An English article from 1674 listed the rules and order of the coffeehouse. Quote, "First gentry, tradesmen, all are welcome hither, and may without affront sit down together. Preeminence of place none here should mind, but take the next fit seat that he can find. Nor need any, if finer persons come, rise up to assign to them his room." Unquote. Garraway's Coffeehouse is where the great scientific thinkers of England, such as Robert Hooke, Isaac Newton, and Edmund Halley, would meet with all comers to discuss scientific philosophies, theories, and experiment design. These exchanges led to some of the greatest scientific discoveries of all time, discoveries that would eventually lead England into the great industrial revolution of the 19th century. The exchange of ideas, unfettered by class constraints, revolutionized the commercial and financial markets. The diverse group of coffeehouse patrons realized that they had more than ideas to exchange, they had goods to exchange as well. Coffeehouse auctions began to take place, where a wide variety of goods could be sold. By the 1670s, coffee houses all over London were places where patrons of all social classes could buy and sell anything from books and artwork to ships and whale oil. Wealthy nobles could purchase artwork from successful artisans. These coffee houses morphed into global enterprises that become the progenitors of such institutions as Sotheby's and Christie's auction houses. The social compromise of the coffeehouse allowed wealthy nobles to interact with successful merchants. Jonathan's Coffee House was famous for these client interactions. Shares of companies were bought and sold there and over time. Jonathan's Coffee House gave rise to the London Stock Exchange. Edward Lloyd of Lloyd's Coffee House held auctions, sold insurance on merchant vessels, and published his own financial newsletter, Lloyd's News. His establishment still exists today as the international insurance exchange company, Lloyd's of London.
Throughout history, the privileged classes in almost every society have taken extraordinary measures to preserve their status in society, going as far as to create laws in an attempt to galvanize their elevated positions. The culture of social compromise that evolved in the coffeehouses of 17th and 18th century England did not solve the social conflict that had entrenched itself in English society as a whole. However, the coffeehouses created a laboratory for the unhindered exchange of ideas between people of all classes who shared common passions and interests. The result, advances in science, economics, and trade that have kept England a leader in all of those areas to this day.